Hello, good morning. This is Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Ansari, Department of Political Science, AMU, Aligarh. Now, this is my third video on the topic welfare state. We have been talking about welfare state that came into prominence after the shortcomings of the minimal state, and in the 19th century and in 20th century, especially after the end of First World War. Now, that is the period till today. What kind of a welfare state we have, that is what I'm going to discuss in this PPT today. So, after uh, the First World War, the liberal economies of the world, they found themselves amidst an unprecedented crisis, and that was a very catastrophic crisis of Great Depression in 1930s. And the crumbling of capitalist economies exposed the economic theory of Adam Smith to be weak in the change perspective, and it proved the weakness of competitive free market economies. Now, the exploitative system of the capitalism was crumbling not because of some external attack, but not only because of its inherent contradictions. It was also at the time when it has almost run out of its all package that it has to offer in the form of laissez-faire. So, Western liberal democracies were facing crisis due to an increasing rate of unemployment, loss of production, starvation of general masses, and an octopus of fascism which was emerging to dislodge the system of capitalism, of course. So the crippled capitalism at that time was unable to stand on its own, and it demanded assistance, and with it a new socio-economic and political outlook that was emerging. And the era of state-regulated capitalism associated with state monopoly of capitalism emerged in the European world and in the USA as a response to the change situation. Now, to save the capitalist economy from this crisis, a theory given by Keynes that emerged, and this is known as the Keynesian revolution. So, Keynesian revolution, Keynes basically was a British, and he was not quite afraid of any word revolution as such, but then he used the word revolution for this change which was to come, that was a Keynesian revolution. The whole argument of Keynes was that in order to save the world system, a part must be checked, and to save capitalism, the capitalist must be checked and controlled by the state, because it was the free hand that was given to the capitalist who basically caused the situation where there was a rampant unemployment and price rises, and masses were they were in the depth of poverty. So he suggested the governments, they could manage their economies by influencing the level of aggregate demand. Now, government spending, in this sense, an injection of demand into the economy. So at times of high unemployment, Keynes recommended the government should reflate their economies instead of deflating, that is reflating by either increasing public spending or cutting taxes. So unemployment could therefore, he suggested, could be solved not by the invisible hand of capitalism, that is give demand and supply, that is the two hands which were considered to be the one that was controlling the whole economy, but by the government intervention as a third hand. Now, in this case, by running a deficit budget, meaning that the government literally overspent its budgetary targets. Now, due to Keynes, who was economic advisor to President who was economic advisor at the time to the British government, but then the Roosevelt, the American president, he took the inspiration from what Keynes was offering, and he came up with the Rooseveltian New Deal program that was put into practice, his own program of action of government direct intervention in the economy. And as an industrialist, I mean, the state was in fact participating in the economic affairs, and they were it was simply which was the government was nationalizing things, and a voice was heard from America that its president was introducing socialism, whereas the reality was that he was building up a state monopoly, that is with capitalism. So, defending the programs that he had taken up, President Roosevelt, he said that people who are hungry and out of job are the stuff of which dictatorship are made. So that was the time when in Germany and in Italy, uh, fascism and Nazism was cropping up, it was coming up. So he suggested that the people are basically hungry and out of job, and they are the ones who are supporting these regimes. So in a way, he was suggesting a capitalist that reform is a necessity to check the rising tide of a socialist revolution and to give concession to these masses or perish in the rise of tide of these extremist forces. So he wanted the capitalists to be defensive and to retreat, and he suggested that if uh, they don't check this hunger, unemployment, and poverty, they are likely to be finished. So Roosevelt implemented the idea of Keynes, and in this way, an era of defensive capitalism began, where the state and the economic system they came closer. The capitalist class welcomed the interference of the state in economic affairs because otherwise its own survival would have been endangered. So a positive state, which was a welfare state, but here the positive in the sense like state itself was being one of the capitalists as a participant in the economy, uh, required the capitalist class as it could safeguard the aggregate interest of this class and appease the working class by welfare services and avoid a revolutionary solution by bringing reforms, regulation in the economy, and that's how balancing the pros and cons of the capitalist system, and thereby nationalizing the sick industries, running the essential industries in the process, and maintain a price level of essential commodities along with their trade and trading at a controlled prices. So the state entered into the industrial system as an industrialist, in commerce and trade as a trader, in export and import as an exporter and importer. So to the general masses, it was a servant which was serving their cause, but for a capitalist, in fact, that state was a savior. Now we come to different views which were given at the time in support of this positive state and the nature of state in welfare state, which was becoming more and more a participant, an industrialist, an importer, exporter, and trader itself in the form of one of the participant in the capitalist economy. Here we have the views of John Galbraith, and he, as an American economist and diplomat, has written about the role of state in the changed circumstances after the Second World War. Now, he has updated the liberal view of the functions and nature of the state. He has analyzed the outlook of the state on issues like production, demand, distribution, price control, unemployment, poverty, scientific research, inflation, security of work, banking, economic security, economic inequality, taxation, technological industrial development, economic stability, education, banking, planning, public service. So he has justified the concept of planned economy. So he was here vouching for a planned economy in the liberal state in view of the changed circumstances of the 20th century. And this planning was to be done at the government level. So planning economy, so far from being unpopular, is warmly regarded by those who know it best as a welcome and a very popular sign. So John Galbraith was in fact a champion of mixed economy, in which he envisaged a situation where public sector may play a dominant role and may work in coordination with private sector. So he criticized the concept of free economy market, which had brought the capitalist world to this level, especially the European and American economies. And after criticizing, he suggested that state intervention and control is the only option, only panacea left for securing and salvaging the situation. So he, in brief, is suggesting certain socialistic measures to save the crippled capitalist economies. Now, Galbraith maintains that the modern liberal democratic state has become an industrial state because of its prominent role in the industrial system. He says the industrial system, in fact, is inextricably associated with the state. In a notable respect, the mature corporation is an arm of the state, and the state is important matter and is an instrument of industrial system. So he gives importance to economic function of the state, and deviating from conventional wisdom, that is the classical liberalism, and separating socialist measures from ideology. He in fact he wanted to use these I mean, he separated the socialist measures from ideology, and he wants to use these to provide extensive public services to general masses. So the crisis of capitalist economy can be averted to some extent by such semi-socialist measures that he had offered and the governments were implementing. So he informs the affluent societies of the West world that increase in the functions, that to economic functions of the state, is a requirement for their survival. So his main concern is the safety of the capitalist order and economic growth under capitalism. He maintains that capitalist economy can survive in spite of an overwhelming crisis, provided the state is authorized to regulate, run, control, and check the economy. So, like Keynes, he is a doctor trying to save the deceased and dying capitalism. Now we move on to views of MacPherson and see what he has to say on this, the positive state or welfare model of the state. So he was a critical liberal, has also supported the positive welfare function of the state. He maintains that it is the only method to fulfill the developmental aims of society, and the state must save the weaker sections of society and maintain economic equilibrium in society. So he was a supporter of positive state and positive liberty. So the modern liberalism that had evolved at the time after First World War and in the process of its challenge of taking on the challenge of economic depression, it can be understood at two different ways. First is that classical liberals had argued that modern liberalism effectively it has broken with the principles of doctrine that had previously defined liberalism, in particular that it had abandoned individualism and embraced collectivism. Whereas the modern liberals, however, they have been at the pain to point out that they built on rather than betrayed classical liberalism. Now, in this view, whereas classical liberals is characterized by a clear theoretical consistency, modern liberalism represents a marriage between the new and the old liberalism. So thus, it embodies ideological and theoretical tensions, notably over the proper role of the state. So the distinctive ideas of this modern liberalism, which has influenced the state at the time, were individuality, positive freedom, social liberalism, and economic management. Now, talking about the state which was the modern liberals were promoting, it was in fact they were endorsing an enabling state, exercising an increasingly wide range of social and economic responsibilities. The state could not force people to be good. It could only provide the conditions in which they were able to make more responsible moral decisions. So the balance between the state and the individual had altered now. But the underlying commitment to the needs and the interest of the individual remained. So modern liberals, they share the classic liberal preferences of self-reliant individuals who take responsibility for their own lives. And the essential difference is the recognition that this can only occur if social conditions allow it to happen. So the contrast, the contrast that was the central to modern liberalism is therefore the desire to help individuals to help themselves. Now here, the social liberalism that was being promoted was that here the government in the later half of 20th century, after Second World War, it sought to achieve national efficiency, healthier workforce, and stronger armies. So they also came under the electoral pressure for social reforms from newly enfranchised industrial workers and in some cases the peasantry. However, in the political argument of welfarism has never been the prerogative of any single ideology. It has put up in different ways by socialists, liberals, conservatives, feminists, and even at times by fascists. So within liberalism, the case for social welfare has been made by the modern liberals. And in marked contrast to classical liberals previously, who extol the virtues of self-help and individual responsibility, these modern liberals, they defended welfarism on the basis of equality of opportunity. If particular individuals or groups are disadvantaged by the social circumstances, then the state processes a social responsibility to reduce or remove these disadvantages to create equal or least or more life chances. Now, the citizens have thus acquired a range of welfare or social rights in these circumstances, such as the right to work, the right to education, and the right to decent housing. So welfare rights are positive rights because they can only be satisfied by the positive action of government and through the provision of state pensions, benefits, perhaps publicly funded health and education services. So during the 20th century, these liberal parties and liberal governments were therefore converted into the cause of the social welfare. So the social liberalism was offering the social welfare to people in the form of these various social securities. For example, the expanded welfare state in the UK was based on the Beveridge Report 1942, which set out to attack the so-called five giants, that is, the want, disease, ignorance, squalor, and idleness. So it memorably promises to protect the citizens from the cradle to the grave. So in the USA, liberal welfarism developed in 1930s during the administration of F.D. Roosevelt, but reached its height in 1960s with the new frontier policies of John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson's Great Society program. So social democratic phase as well was reached in this very era when social liberalism was further developed in the second half of 20th century with the emergence of so-called social democratic liberalism, especially in the writings of John Rawls. So social democratic liberalism is distinguished by its support for relative equal social equality, usually seen as defining value of socialism. So in Theory of Justice 1970, Rawls developed a defense of redistribution and welfare based on the idea of equality as fairness. So he argued that if people were unaware of the social position and circumstances, they would view an egalitarian society as fairer than an inegalitarian one. So on the ground that desire to avoid poverty is greater than the attraction of riches. So John Rawls, he proposed the difference principle to be created, that society and economic inequality should be arranged so as to benefit the least well off, and recognizing the need for some measures of inequality to provide an incentive to work. So nevertheless, such a theory of justice remains liberal rather than socialist, as it is rooted in assumptions about egoism and self-interest rather than a belief in social solidarity. Now, economic management was another area where the state was intervening in this half of 20th half of the century, later half, where it was acting as a welfare state, as being one of the capitalists. So in addition to providing social welfare, these model of 20th century Western government also sought to deliver prosperity by managing their economies. Now this once again involved rejecting classical liberal thinking, in particular its belief in self-regulating free market and the doctrine of laissez-faire. So the abandonment of laissez-faire came about because of the increasing complexity of industrial capitalist economies and their apparent inability to guarantee general prosperity if left to their own devices. So the Great Depression of 1930s, sparked off by the Wall Street crash of 1929, led to a high level of unemployment throughout the industrialized world, and in much of the developing world, this was the most dramatic demonstration of the failure of the free market. And after Second World War, virtually all the Western states, they adopted this policy of economic intervention, economic management by the state, in an attempt to prevent a return of pre-war level of unemployment and a Keynesian welfare state. We have already discussed about Keynesian. So here he was being referred as suggesting economic sort of a management. He suggests that the government would manage their economies by influencing the level of aggregate demand. And the government spending in this sense is a sort of an injection, and that injection is in the form of a demand in the economy that can be created by the government. So taxation, on the other hand, is he was considered as withdrawal from the economy. So he reduces aggregate demand in the form of taxes as it reduces and dampens down economic activity. So at times of high unemployment, Keynes recommended that government should reflate their economies by either increasing public spending or cutting taxes. So that's how he suggested unemployment can be checked. So Keynesian demand management, and that management which promised to give government the ability to manipulate employment and growth level, and hence to secure general prosperity. So as with the provision of social welfare, modern liberals have seen economic management as being constructive in promoting prosperity and harmony in civil society. Now, if you compare the two, that is welfare state that we have discussed so far, and before that the minimal state that we had already talked about, so we find welfare state or the modern liberalism, when it is contrasted with classical liberalism, the features which it highlights is that the classical liberalism, it aims at economic liberalization, but the modern emphasized social liberalization or liberalism. So classical, they focused on egoistic individualism, whereas modern, they believed in developmental individualism. So under the influence of utilitarians like Bentham, classical liberalism maximized personal utility, whereas modern liberalism, it targeted personal growth of individuals in the society. So it encouraged the state to devise mechanisms and policies promoting fullest development of individuals, whereas the older version of liberalism in minimal state provided a negative state, envisaging a negative freedom in the affairs of individuals, whereas the welfare state, the liberal, that is the modern liberals, they maintain positive freedom for the individuals. Now, this has resulted in a minimal state for classical liberals, whereas in modern liberalism, the concept of enabling state was popularized. So, free market economy or laissez-faire was the demand of the individuals in the classical version, whereas the liberalism. But the welfare state is a managed economy, where the state itself managed the economy, directly interfering as a third hand in stabilizing the two hand, which has brought about unemployment, poverty, and misery for the masses. So the freedom of individuals is guaranteed by state through right-based justice, whereas the welfare state considered individual justice as fairness, and classical liberalism promoted strict meritocracy. But the welfare state of modern liberalism had a concern for the poor as its primary goal. So the nature of state was individualistic concerns and responsibility in the classical version, but in modern liberalism, social responsibility of state vis-a-vis individual was cast like a safety net, and welfare of individuals extended from cradle to grave. So if we see after 1980s, what the welfare state has come to acquire its status and size, we find the welfare state in globalization is an accelerated globalization from 1980s onwards. Now together it was associated with developments. It can be seen to have supported a worldwide ascendancy of liberalism in a number of ways. However, this hegemonic liberalism, which it wore a number of faces and many kind of a shape it has come into, reflecting not only its multifarious nature of liberalism, but also at times its internal tensions. Then the first phase of global liberalism is neoliberalism, which is so closely linked to economic globalization that many commentators, they treat neoliberalism and globalization as if they are part of the same phenomena. So neoliberal globalization is the term that is used for that. The link occurs for a variety of reasons, and in particular the intensified international competition that it has generated. It has encouraged governments to deregulate their economies and reduce taxes level in the hope of attracting inward investment and preventing transnational corporations from relocating elsewhere. So the invitation was given to foreign capitals in the form of reducing the tariff barriers and bringing in these investors from outside, foreign investors in the form of the transnational corporations into the country. Now, if you look at the trend which has been developing after that, so strong downward pressure is also exerted on public spending as a result. So welfare state was retreating. So state was retreating in the impact of a globalized world. So the welfare state, the positive state, was retreating by reducing the public spending, and especially on welfare budget, by the fact that in the context of heightened global competition, the control of inflation has replaced the maintenance of full employment. So they were targeting more on keeping the prices in control than keeping their people employed in services, as the principal goal of economic policy changed in the later half. So such pressures, together with the revived growth and productivity rates of the US economy during the 1990s and after that, and the relatively sluggish performance of other models of national capitalism, whether it was running in Japan or in Germany in particular, meant that the neoliberalism appeared to stand unchallenged as the dominant ideology of the new world economy. So, with that, we come to the end of the welfare state that we have been talking about, and with its recent trend, we find that the liberal story of the state function has gone, it has gone changing. It has changed from Adam Smith onwards to what we find with MacPherson, and finally we come to the globalized world where the liberalism is, as a state policy, has invited the foreign investors in the form of transnational investors, and it is retreating its welfare funding, which earlier it used to do. So the times have changed, and it has started with the minimum functions of the state, and now it supports the maximum functions, and that too at the level of international level, when it has acquired the role of spreading the liberalism principles around the world in the form of democracy. So irrespective of the changes in liberal view, one thing is clear beyond that, that liberalism has been the philosophy of the capitalist class. And it cannot be the philosophy of the overthrow of the rotten capitalist order. It will always survive, and somehow it will change different forms if they change the situation and circumstances. So its concept of function of the state has been changing in view of the changing socio-economic and political needs of the capitalist class. So this is only the reason why changes in liberal view of the state functions has taken place, and they have been evolving with the change in time, and that is the reason why, as an economic system, as an ideology of laissez-faire in one form or another, whether in minimal state or maximum state or welfare state, it has survived till today, and it is still in force at international level and dictating terms in the form of a globalized economy where democracy is being promoted and liberal values are spread as the only alternative. And with the demise of erstwhile USSR and the final triumph of the liberal economy and liberal world, it has been proved beyond doubt that the welfare state in the form of the capitalist state will keep on surviving as long as it keeps on evolving, as long as it keeps adapting to the changes which come about in the world. So that was the end of what I wanted to say on this topic. Thank you for being part of it. Thank you.